I interviewed this country musician, if you know who Ricky Skaggs is, and he had
I'm not super familiar, but I know who he is.
He was like a country bluegrass guy back in the day, and he's still pretty big in the bluegrass scene. And when he turned 55, I had asked him what that meant, and he said that I guess biblically 5 means grace, and he said so 55 must mean double grace. And I was wondering, are you seeing any double grace in your life these days, personally and professionally?
No. I mean, I don't know about biblical numerology at all.
I guess the idea about being 55 and where you're at with your life these days.
My life is at a great place. It's too bad it was just wasted on age.
Well,
I didn't have this shit figured out when I was younger. But I guess that's just kind of comes with, learning how to live.
Well, it's one of those things where, the older you get, that's when, I guess, quote unquote, the truth is revealed,
Yeah. I don't know if it ever gets fully revealed, but if it did, there would be like some, old people walking around who actually have the answers instead of just claiming they do.
Yeah, I agree. Do you see any change in your thought process these days, or maybe some full circle moments that are happening?
I'm sure there's full circle moments that happen, but I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I don't know if there's so much a change in my thought process as like more of a refinement, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, is there one of those things where it's like nothing's the same, everything's the same? I mean,
I'm still the same person. It's just I can kind of see more angles and feel like I've got a little more perspective.
Yeah. Well, with that said, though, Superfuzz Bigmuff turns 30 next year, as far as I know. How has that album held up through the years, and what do you remember when you think back on those recordings?
I mean, I think it was a total snapshot of where we were at the time, and I think it holds up pretty well. I mean, there's some songs, like we occasionally will play like Need or something, and I'll go like, oh my God, those lyrics are terrible. They're so overwrought. I'm in my 20s and everything's so fucking desperate, and it's like, it really wasn't.
What is it about those songs that they still hold up, though? I mean, they're still being played all over the world, even now,
Oh, I think it's, I don't know, I guess it's just mainly the music. I mean, the guitar sounds are super cool, the drumming is fantastic. But we were pretty good. We were a pretty good little band.
What's it like these days? Do you see it as something that you appreciate more as you've gotten older, that it's still touring and still relevant?
Well, we never ever stopped, so it's not like, to us. It's kind of not really a surprise, because like there was a period there, kind of in the late '90s, when things were like, people seemed to be over the whole Seattle thing and whatnot. But after that, like, kind of, we've just kind of continuously been playing and touring and stuff, and people's reactions to those songs have always just been kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, what I noticed too is, at least in the interviews I've watched over the years with you guys, that I feel like Mudhoney has always had this take it or leave it kind of thing, where you just worry about yourselves and not any like obligations outside of what's within the band.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much you can do about anything else,
Well, it's like the idea where if we're all to go away tomorrow, at least we had some fun times.
Oh yeah. You know something I don't? Yeah, I mean...
Well, where does that attitude come from, I guess?
I don't know. I guess it just kind of comes from our own personalities and like how and where we grew up, and we were, we all pretty much cut our teeth on American hardcore in the early '80s, and that there was no concept of like anything's going to be bigger than this.
Or that you'd be playing it for 30 years maybe too,
Well, yeah, that was also a thing, like, I mean, in those days, like, a band would last half a year maybe, and and would be considered legendary in the scene or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was the idea of, like, being around for 30 years just at that point was a ridiculous notion.
or being in your 50s playing hard rock music or punk music.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Like the whole Who thing, like, hope I die before I get old kind of thing, but...
Yeah, I never took that stance, because there was a time when I never assumed that I would live beyond 30, like I would make it to 30.
And then you turn 30 and you're like...
But that was just because I was living in the moment so much that I wasn't thinking about it. Like, I wasn't making long-range plans.
Well, it's like that Keith Richards documentary, if you've seen that on Netflix, where he said, I never want to live past 30, and then when he got to 31, he was like, well, this ain't so bad,
Yeah, of course not. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't want to be 30 years old. It was just like, I was just sort of a dumb shit who couldn't conceive of anything beyond now.
Yeah.
Much like a dog.
Yeah.
What are we doing now? What are we doing now? Are we eating now? Now?
Living in that moment and also enjoying it for what it is, do you think that is a reason why the band has lasted this long? That you never looked at it as urgency?
Sure. For sure, yeah. I mean, we never really set ourselves up for disappointment by, like, having high expectations for, like, commercial success or anything like that,
Yeah.
So, everything is, as the saying goes, has been gravy.
Yeah.
Which may not make a meal, but
but you're not hungry.
Oh, man, I've been eating nothing but gravy for 30 years. This is terrible. I'm sort of malnourished.
It's got to be interesting, though, too, with the idea that the bands that you came up with, yourself included, have been kind of, I don't know, I guess the idea, like, now you have bands like Pearl Jam in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and now I hear Nirvana on classic rock radio. It's kind of like, what the hell happened,
Right, but I mean, that's just a feature of time.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the early 90s were a long time ago now.
I know.
And so, like, the people who were kids then are now in their 40s.
What do you remember most of?
That makes sense that stuff moves into classic rock.
Yeah.
What's kind of funny to me is, like, the few times a friend of mine is actually a DJ at the local classic rock radio station.
Yeah.
And sometimes I enjoy listening to him because he's super funny and kind of sarcastic about the music he plays. And it's funny to me that, like, that somehow the Talking Heads made that transition into classic rock.
Yeah.
Because at the time they weren't really, but for some reason the Cars were all, they were like the one new wave band that was played on mainstream rock radio that kind of was able to stick around. And the Talking Heads were just sort of like, that was the Talking Heads, that weird band from Rhode Island. I mean, I remember in the late 70s, like, the local rock station kind of flirting with that kind of stuff. Like, they would play a little bit like Elvis Costello in a band called the Fabulous Poodles, and Flash in the Pan, which is like a band of the older brother of the Young Brothers from AC/DC, George Young, I believe. He was also in the Easy Beats, but, like, they had a kind of new wavy song. So it was kind of, and then like a year or two later, all that stuff was just sort of banished from the,
Yeah.
it was like a first disco sucked, then new wave sucked, or whatever.